You know, what my father heard when I was born? Silence. Not the celebration you might expect. Not the joy, just silence. And then, as he walked through the corridors of that hospital, he heard whispers. Sympathetic whispers. It's a girl. Better luck next time. As if my existence was a lottery ticket that came up short. As if my mother had somehow failed. As if I was a mistake that needed apologizing for. My father tells me he stood in that corridor, holding the paper that confirmed he had a daughter, and a relative, trying to be comforting, actually said these words to him. Don't worry, at least she's healthy. You can try again for a boy. And start saving now, girls are just a waste of money anyway. A waste of money. Let that sink in for a moment. I was 3 hours old, and I had already been appraised, evaluated, and deemed financially unviable. I hadn't taken my first steps, hadn't spoken my first words, hadn't even opened my eyes properly to see the world, and someone had already calculated my worth and found it wanting. That phrase, girls are a waste of money, those 5 words have echoed through centuries across continents, in villages and cities, in palaces and in poverty. They've been spoken in hushed tones over tea, declared boldly in family meetings, calculated coldly in economic equations. Those words have justified neglect, validated discrimination, and excused the systematic devaluation of half of humanity. But here's what I want to talk to you about today. Here's what we're going to explore together for the next hour and a half. I want to dismantle that lie brick by brick. I want to show you not just why it's wrong, which should be obvious, but why it's the most expensive, devastating, civilization, crippling mistake a society can make. I want to show you that every time someone says girls are a waste of money, they're not just being cruel. They're being catastrophically stupid from every angle, moral, economic, social, and historical. So let me tell you some stories. Real stories, stories that will make you angry, stories that will make you think, and stories that will, I hope, make you realize that we've been calculating worth with the wrong formula this entire time. Let me tell you about Malala. You know her story. Most of you do. But do you know the economic calculation that was made about her? In Swat Valley, in Pakistan, when the Taliban took control, they made a very clear economic argument. They said educating girls was a waste of resources. Think about it from their twisted logic. You spend money on a girl's education, and what's the return on investment? She gets married, she leaves your household, she takes that education to another family. From a pure, cold, transactional standpoint, they said it makes no sense. Better to save that money. Better to invest it in sons. So they banned girls from going to school. They didn't just ban it, they enforced it with violence. They shot Malala in the head because she had the audacity to believe that her education mattered. She was 15 years old. Now, fast forward. That girl they tried to silence became the youngest Nobel Prize laureate in history. She has addressed the United Nations. She has met with presidents and prime ministers. She has inspired legislation and policy changes across the globe. The Malala Fund has helped extend education to millions of girls worldwide. The economic impact of her advocacy, if you could even calculate it, runs into billions of dollars in economic development, in GDP growth in countries where girls' education rates have improved, in the breaking of poverty cycles. The men who shot her, who made that economic calculation that she was a waste of resources, where are they now? Dead or hiding in caves, their movement shattered, their ideology rejected by history. They made an investment decision. They invested in violence, in ignorance, in suppression. And their return on investment, absolute civilizational bankruptcy. Meanwhile, the waste of money. Girl changed the world. But let me bring this closer to home. Let me tell you about someone you've never heard of. Her name was Anandibai Gopalrao Joshi. In 1865, she was born in India at a time when the mortality rate for women during childbirth was staggering. She was married at 9 years old, as was common then, and by 14, she had her first child. The baby died. And Anandibai, lying there having just lost her child, with no trained medical help, because there were no female doctors and male doctors couldn't treat women due to social restrictions, made a decision. She decided she would become a doctor. Let me tell you what that meant in 1865 in India. It meant defying every single social norm. It meant being ostracized. Her own community declared her an outcast. They said she was polluting herself with Western education. They said, and these are recorded words, that spending any money on her education was throwing money into the sea, a waste of money to educate a girl, especially in something as audacious as medicine. But her husband, Gopal Rao, believed in her. He invested everything he had in her education. He faced social exile. He faced financial hardship. People called him foolish. They called him irresponsible. How could he waste money like this on a girl? Anandabai went to America. She became the first Indian woman to receive a medical degree from an American institution, the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, in 1886. She returned to India, and though she died young at 21 from tuberculosis, she had already inspired an entire generation. She proved it was possible. Within decades, hundreds of Indian women entered medicine. Those women saved hundreds of thousands of lives. They treated women who would have otherwise had no access to health care. They trained more doctors. They created a cascade of impact that continues to this day. That waste of money saved more lives than most armies ever have. You see, when someone says girls are a waste of money, what they're really revealing is a fundamental ignorance about how value works, how investment works, how societies actually prosper. They're using an accounting system from the Bronze Age to evaluate 21st century economics. They're looking at one household's balance sheet and ignoring the entire civilization's prosperity. Let me give you some numbers, because sometimes stories need statistics to back them up. The World Bank did extensive research on this. They found that for every additional year of secondary school education a girl receives, her future earnings increase by 15 to 25%. But more than that, and this is crucial, her children are 40% more likely to live past age 5. Her children will stay in school longer. They will earn more. The cycle of poverty breaks. Goldman Sachs released a report, and I want you to hear this because it's coming from one of the most profit-driven institutions on the planet. They're not in the business of charity. They're in the business of identifying investment opportunities. And they said that if you could close the gap in female education and employment, you would increase GDP by up to $12 trillion globally. 12 trillion. That's not social justice talking. That's pure, cold, hard capitalism saying that keeping girls out of education and the workforce is the single most expensive mistake an economy can make. Still think girls are a waste of money. Let's dig deeper. Let me tell you about a woman named Dr. Patricia Bath. Born in Harlem in 1942, grew up in a time when being black and female meant you had 2 major strikes against you in America. She loved science. But her guidance counselor told her parents, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is the essence, not to waste money on an advanced education for her because she'd just get married and it would be for nothing. Her parents ignored that advice. They invested in her education. Dr. Bath went on to invent laser cataract surgery. Read that again. She invented the technique that has restored sight to millions of people worldwide. Millions. She holds 4 patents. She was the first African-American female doctor to receive a medical patent. The economic value of her invention, the productivity gained from people who can see and work, the suffering alleviated, the technology sector that grew around her innovation is incalculable. That guidance counselor who thought educating her was a waste. I wonder if they ever needed cataract surgery later in life. I wonder if they ever realized that their sight was restored by the woman they told to stay home. Now let me address the core of this terrible argument head on. Because there's a specific economic calculation that people make. They say, we have limited resources. We can either invest in a son or a daughter. If we invest in a son, he'll take care of us in old age. He'll carry the family name forward. He'll bring a daughter-in-law who will work in our household. He'll inherit our property and keep it in the family. If we invest in a daughter, she'll get married and leave. We'll have to pay dowry. All that investment walks out the door to benefit another family. It's just economics. This argument sounds logical until you examine it for more than 30 seconds. Let's break down why this is not just morally bankrupt, but economically illiterate. First, the assumption that sons take care of parents. I want you to look around at the elderly care crisis in countries that heavily favor sons. In India, in China, in many parts of Asia and the Middle East where son preference is strongest, you know who actually takes care of aging parents? Daughters. Study after study shows that daughters provide more elderly care, more emotional support, more actual day-to-day help. Sons may contribute financially, but daughters contribute time, care, presence. And as populations age, that care is becoming more valuable than money. You can't hire someone to love you. You can't pay someone to actually care about your well-being. That comes from the children you raised to be empathetic, caring, and present. And societies have raised girls to be those things while simultaneously calling them worthless for having those exact qualities. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. Second, the dowry argument. Let's be very clear, dowry is not an economic necessity. It's a social sickness. It's extortion legalized by tradition. And you know what's fascinating? In societies that value girls' education and employment, dowry decreases or disappears. Because when women have economic power, when they bring earnings and opportunities to a marriage, the entire calculation changes. The problem isn't that girls cost money. The problem is that societies have created exploitative systems and then blamed girls for the existence of those systems. It's like if I broke your leg and then charged you money for crutches and then complained that you're expensive to maintain. The girl isn't the problem. The system that commodifies her is the problem. Third, this idea that investment in a daughter walks out the door to benefit another family. This reveals such a narrow, tribal understanding of economics that it's almost medieval. You're not investing in your family line. You're investing in civilization. When you educate a girl, when you make her healthy, when you give her opportunities, she doesn't just benefit one family. She benefits her community, her economy, her nation. Her children will be healthier. Her earnings will circulate through the economy. Her innovations might change the world. This isn't theoretical. Let me give you a concrete example. Rwanda in 1994 experienced a genocide. 800,000 people murdered in 100 days. The country was devastated, broken, considered a failed state. Today, Rwanda has the highest percentage of women in parliament of any country on earth. 61%. They invested heavily in girls' education, in women's economic participation. And you know what happened? Rwanda's economy has grown at an average of 7 to 8% annually for 2 decades. It's one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. Life expectancy has doubled. Poverty has been cut in half. Now, correlation isn't always causation, but researchers have studied this extensively. The empowerment of women was a key factor in Rwanda's economic miracle. When they had nothing, when they had to rebuild from absolute zero, they made a choice. They invested in everyone, including and especially women, and it worked. Meanwhile, countries that continue to underinvest in girls, that continue to see them as financial burdens, continue to struggle with poverty, with slow growth, with social instability. So who's wasting money? The countries investing in girls who are thriving, or the countries treating girls as burdens who are stagnating? Let me tell you about someone from the world of business, Sarah Blakely. She grew up middle class in Florida, not rich, not poor. She sold fax machines door to door for 7 years. She had an idea for footless pantyhose. She spent $5,000 of her own savings to develop it. Every manufacturer she approached laughed at her. She was a woman with no fashion experience trying to enter an established industry. She was told repeatedly that she was wasting her time and money. She persisted. She founded Spanx. Today, Sarah Blakely is a self-made billionaire. She was the youngest self-made female billionaire in America at one point. She has created thousands of jobs. She has donated hundreds of millions to charity, particularly to programs that support female entrepreneurs. That $5,000 she wasted. It became a billion-dollar company that has generated billions more in economic activity, in jobs, in taxes, in supply chain impacts. Every person who told her she was wasting her time and money was catastrophically wrong. But here's what I want you to understand. For every Sarah Blakely who made it despite the obstacles, there are millions who didn't. Not because they lacked talent or drive or ideas, but because they never got the initial investment. They never got the chance. Someone somewhere decided they were a waste of money. Think about that. Think about the innovations we don't have. The businesses that were never founded. The books that were never written. The discoveries that were never made. The diseases that haven't been cured. The problems that haven't been solved. Not because the capable people didn't exist, but because half of them were told from birth that investing in them was throwing money away. We're not just wasting the money we don't spend on girls. We're wasting the infinite returns that investment would have generated. Let me talk about something else. Beauty standards and the actual waste of money. Because here's an irony that should make your head spin. The same societies that say girls are a waste of money to educate, to keep healthy, to give opportunities, those same societies will spend enormous amounts of money on making girls beautiful for marriage. Skin lightening creams, beauty treatments, jewelry for dowry, elaborate weddings. The global beauty industry is worth over $500 billion annually, and women are the primary consumers, often not by choice, but by social pressure. So let me get this straight. Money spent on a girl's education, waste. Money spent on her health, waste. Money spent on her business idea, waste. But money spent on making her fair-skinned enough to attract a husband. Money spent on gold jewelry to make her acceptable to in-laws. Money spent on a wedding that will put families in debt. That's considered essential. Do you see the insanity? We're not opposed to spending money on girls. We're opposed to spending money on things that would give them power, independence, and agency. We're perfectly happy to spend money on things that keep them dependent, commodified, and controllable. That's not economics. That's oppression with a price tag. Let me tell you about Kalpana Chawla, born in Kannauр, India in 1962. Her father was initially against higher education for her. He believed, as many did and many still do, that girls should focus on marriage, that advanced education for daughters was unnecessary and extravagance. But Kalpana was brilliant, especially in mathematics and science. Her mother and her own determination convinced her father to let her pursue engineering. She went on to earn a degree in aeronautical engineering, then a master's, then a PhD. She joined NASA. She became the first woman of Indian origin to go to space, flying on Space Shuttle Columbia. She became a hero to millions of girls across the world. She showed them that the sky wasn't the limit, that there was no limit at all. When she died in the Columbia disaster in 2003, the whole world mourned. India mourned. And her father, in his grief, said something profound. He said he was grateful he had let her pursue her dreams, that he was grateful he had invested in her education, because even though she was gone, what she had achieved, what she had inspired would live forever. That waste of money reached the stars. Now, I want to address something that often comes up in this conversation. People say, but I know families who invested in their daughter's education and the daughters still chose to get married and become homemakers. So wasn't that education wasted? This question itself is so loaded with problematic assumptions that I barely know where to start. But let's try. First, the idea that being a homemaker means education is wasted. Do you know who raises the next generation? Mothers, primarily in most societies. Do you know what the single strongest predictor of a child's educational success is? The mother's education level. An educated mother is more likely to ensure her children are educated. She's more likely to provide cognitive stimulation. She's more likely to value learning. She's more likely to advocate for her children's health and education. She's more likely to raise children who break cycles of poverty. So even if a woman only applies her education to raising children, that's not a waste. That's an investment that compounds over generations. But second, and more importantly, why do we only ask this question about women? Men get educated and then choose all sorts of paths. Some become CEOs, some become teachers, some become artists, some become stay-at-home dads, some work jobs unrelated to their degrees. We never say, education is wasted on men who don't maximize their earning potential. We understand that education has intrinsic value. It makes you a better thinker, a better citizen, a more informed voter, a more complete human being. But with women, we only value education if it has immediate, visible economic returns. That's not an economic calculation. That's a double standard. Let me tell you about my grandmother. She was educated up to the 8th grade, which was unusual for her time and place. She could read and write fluently. She could do complex mathematics in her head. She never had a formal job. She was a homemaker her entire life. And you know what she did? She managed the finances of a household of 10 people with the precision of a CFO. She negotiated with vendors. She invested in small savings schemes. She ensured every child in that household, boy and girl, went to school. She taught her daughters in law to read when they came from villages with no education. She wrote letters for neighbors who were illiterate. She was the go-to person in her community for advice on everything from health to education to dealing with government bureaucracy. Was her education wasted? Her children all became successful professionals. Her grandchildren are doctors, engineers, teachers, entrepreneurs. The ripple effect of her education, her literacy, her numeracy, her confidence spreads through 3 generations now. But because she never had a salary, because she never had a job title, people might look at her and say, see, education was wasted on her. Those people would be fools. Let me give you another angle on this. Let's talk about some of the most expensive disasters in modern history, and let's look at who made the decisions that led to them. The 2008 financial crisis, caused primarily by reckless risk taking in the financial sector. The leadership of the banks that collapsed or needed bailouts. overwhelmingly male. Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, Merrill Lynch, leadership was 90% plus male. Research done afterwards showed that financial institutions with more women in leadership were more stable, took fewer excessive risks, and were more likely to survive the crisis. So all that money, all those resources, all that education that went into producing the men who crashed the global economy, was that a waste? Or do we only ask if education is wasted when women are the recipients? The Challenger disaster. 7 lives lost because of a decision to launch despite warnings about O-ring failure in cold temperatures. The decision makers who overrode the engineers' concerns. All men. Research has shown that diverse decision-making groups are less likely to fall victim to groupthink and more likely to consider warnings seriously. I'm not saying women never make mistakes. That would be absurd. I'm saying that the question, is investing in girls a waste, is only ever asked in one direction. We never calculate the waste of investing in boys who grow up to start wars, crash economies, create environmental disasters, or simply live mediocre lives. We accept that as the normal variance of humanity, but we demand that every investment in a girl show perfect returns. That's not economics. That's prejudice dressed up in a spreadsheet. Let me tell you about Wangari Maathai. Born in Kenya in 1940. She won a scholarship to study in the United States, part of a program that educated African students. Some people in her community questioned why a woman should receive this opportunity. Why waste it on a girl when a boy could use it? Wangari earned a bachelor's degree in biology, then a master's, then became the first woman in East and Central Africa to earn a PhD. She returned to Kenya and started the Green Belt movement. Over 30 years, that movement planted over 51 million trees. 51 million. Those trees prevented soil erosion, provided resources for communities, combated deforestation, and became part of the global environmental movement. Wangari Maathai won the Nobel Peace Prize, the first African woman to do so. She transformed environmental conservation in Africa. She empowered thousands of women to become environmental leaders and entrepreneurs. That wasted. Scholarship educated a woman who helped save forests, fight desertification, and inspire a global movement. But let's talk about something even more fundamental. Let's talk about economies and how they actually work. Because I think a lot of this waste of money thinking comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of what creates prosperity. Imagine 2 villages, they're identical in every way. Same population, same resources, same starting capital. Village A decides to invest only in boys. They send boys to school. They give boys healthcare. They give boys opportunities. Girls get minimal investment, enough to keep them alive and working, but nothing more. Village B invests equally in everyone. Fast forward 20 years. What happens? In Village A, you have a workforce where half the population is educated and skilled and half is not. The boys have opportunities, but they have to support not just themselves, but entirely provide for wives who have no earning capacity. When these men have children, the mothers can't help with homework because they're not educated. Health outcomes are worse because uneducated mothers don't know how to identify health issues or navigate healthcare systems. The population grows faster because uneducated women have more children, which strains resources further. Economic growth is limited because you're only using half your potential workforce. In Village B, you have a workforce where everyone is educated and skilled. Both men and women can earn. Households have 2 potential incomes instead of 1. Women have fewer children, but those children are healthier, better educated, and more productive. More people are contributing to innovation, to entrepreneurship, to solving problems. Economic growth is faster because you're using your full potential. This isn't theoretical. This is exactly what we've seen happen in real countries. Countries that educated everyone, that gave opportunities to everyone, grew faster and became more prosperous. Countries that held back half their population stayed poor. South Korea in the 1950s was one of the poorest countries on earth. They made a decision to invest heavily in education for everyone, girls and boys. Today, South Korea is one of the world's leading economies. They didn't do this despite educating girls. They did this because they educated girls. Meanwhile, countries that continue to undervalue girls' education continue to struggle. It's not a coincidence. It's cause and effect. When you say girls are a waste of money, you're not just being cruel to girls. You're sabotaging your entire society's economic future. Let me share something personal. I mentioned my father earlier. He didn't listen to that relative who told him I was a waste of money. He and my mother invested in me the same as they would have invested in a son. education, opportunities, encouragement, belief. And I'm not special. I'm not a genius. I'm not one of these exceptional stories I've been telling you about. I'm just a person who was given a chance. And you know what I did with that chance. I became financially independent. I've never needed anyone to support me. I've paid taxes. I've created value in my work. I've helped my parents, not as an obligation, but because I have the means and I love them. I've employed people. I've mentored younger women and men starting their careers. I've voted. I've volunteered. I've contributed to my community. I am, in the most boring, ordinary way, a productive member of society. And none of that would have happened if my parents had listened to the people who said I was a waste of money. Multiply me by millions. Billions. That's what we're talking about. Not special cases. Not exceptional geniuses. Just ordinary people who, when given a chance, contribute to the world. Now, let me address one more argument I often hear. People say, look, in an ideal world, sure, we'd invest in everyone. But we don't live in an ideal world. We live in a world of limited resources. Families have to make choices. If you can only afford to educate one child, isn't it rational to choose the boy? This argument sounds pragmatic, but it's actually self-defeating. Because the reason resources are limited in the first place is often because you're only using half your workforce. You're creating the scarcity that you're using to justify the discrimination. It's a vicious cycle, and the way to break it is not to entrench it further. But even accepting the premise, even in situations of real scarcity, the evidence shows that investing in girls gives you more return. Because girls have been taught to be responsible, to care for families, to lift others up. When you invest in a girl's education in a poor family, she's more likely to use her earnings to educate her siblings, to improve the household's nutrition, to invest in the family's well-being. Study after study confirms this. Women reinvest 90% of their income back into their families. Men, 30 to 40%. So even in the coldest, most purely transactional analysis, investing in the girl is often the better economic choice for the family. But you know what? I'm tired of making the economic argument. I'm tired of having to justify a girl's existence with GDP statistics and return on investment calculations. Let me say something radical. Even if it were true, even if investing in girls provided zero economic return, even if every dollar spent on a daughter disappeared into a void, it would still be the right thing to do. Because girls are human beings. They have intrinsic worth, they have rights, they have dignity. The fact that we have to prove girls are worth investing in, the fact that we have to bring out statistics and studies and examples, the fact that their basic humanity isn't enough, that's the real tragedy. When a boy is born, nobody asks, will he provide a good return on investment? We invest in him because he's a human being and he deserves a chance to flourish. We should do the same for girls, not because it's economically optimal, though it is, but because it's the baseline requirement of a moral society. But since we live in a world that often responds better to economic arguments than moral ones, let me give you a few more devastating statistics. Child marriage. When girls are married young, taken out of school, their lifetime earnings are reduced by 9% for every year of education they lose. Globally, child marriage costs the economy trillions of dollars in lost earnings and lost productivity. Trillions. That's not money saved by not investing in girls. That's money lost by devaluing them. Maternal mortality. When girls don't get adequate health care, when they're married young and their bodies aren't ready for childbirth, they die. 700 women die every day from preventable pregnancy and childbirth-related causes. That's not just a humanitarian disaster. That's an economic disaster. Each of those women could have contributed 40 or more productive years to the economy. The World Bank estimates that maternal deaths cost the global economy $15 billion annually in lost productivity. Gender-based violence. When societies teach men that women have less value, violence against women increases. The economic cost of gender-based violence globally is estimated at over $1.5 trillion annually. That includes healthcare costs, lost productivity, criminal justice costs, and lost economic output. So when you call girls a waste of money, when you devalue them, when you create systems that oppress them, you're not saving money. You're burning it. You're burning it in hospital beds where girls die from malnutrition because they were fed last. You're burning it in schools that half empty because girls aren't allowed to attend. You're burning it in lost innovations, lost businesses, lost discoveries, lost potential. The waste isn't investing in girls. The waste is not investing in girls. Let me tell you one more story, and then I want to bring this home. There's a woman named Dr. Hayat Sindhi, born in Saudi Arabia in Mecca. When she was young, she dreamed of being a scientist. In Saudi Arabia at that time, women faced enormous restrictions. Education for women was limited. Opportunities were scarce. Her family encouraged her, but the society around them said she was reaching for something inappropriate, something wasteful. She went to the UK for university. She had to overcome language barriers, cultural barriers, financial barriers. She earned a PhD in biotechnology from Cambridge University. She became the first female member of the Consultative Assembly of Saudi Arabia. She co-founded Diagnostics for All, a company that created affordable diagnostic tools for developing countries. Her innovations have brought healthcare to people who had no access. She's influenced policy in Saudi Arabia and beyond. She's inspired a generation of Arab women to enter science. But here's the detail that gets me. When she first applied to universities in the UK, she was rejected multiple times. One rejection letter basically said that they weren't sure it was worth investing in her education given her background and the likelihood she'd return home and not use her degree. They thought she was a waste of money. She proved them wrong. And in doing so, she's made the world immeasurably better. So here's what I want you to take away from all of this. Every single time someone says girls are a waste of money, they're making a prediction. They're predicting that investment in a girl will not yield returns. And history has proven over and over and over again that prediction is wrong. Not sometimes, not occasionally, every single time. The girls who were told they were worthless went on to become Nobel laureates, astronauts, inventors, entrepreneurs, leaders, scientists, artists, teachers, doctors, and yes, mothers who raised the next generation to be better than ours. The societies that invested in girls prospered. The societies that didn't stagnated. The families that educated their daughters found those daughters lifted everyone around them. The families that didn't stay trapped in poverty. The pattern is undeniable. The evidence is overwhelming. The conclusion is inescapable. Girls are not a waste of money. Societies that devalue girls waste money, waste potential, waste lives, and waste their own futures. So what do we do about it? Because I don't want to just spend 90 minutes making you angry or sad. I want to spend this time giving you something you can use, something that can change minds and change lives. First, if you're a parent, invest in your daughters. Not because I told you to, but because it's the smartest investment you'll ever make, and invest equally. Not conditionally. Not, we'll educate you until you get married. Fully. Completely. The same as you would a son. Second, if you're a teacher, a mentor, a coach, a guide of any kind, look at the girls in your sphere of influence. Are you encouraging them the same as boys? Are you letting your subconscious biases lower your expectations? Are you steering them away from math, science, leadership because of gender? Check yourself. Because your words carry weight, and you might be the only person telling a girl she can reach for the stars. Third, if you're a policymaker, a business leader, someone with institutional power, look at your systems. Are they set up to give girls equal chances? Are scholarships gender neutral? Are hiring practices fair? Are promotions based on merit or gender? You have the power to change structures, not just individuals. Fourth, if you're someone who has heard this phrase, who has said this phrase, who has thought this phrase even privately, I'm asking you to reconsider. Look at the evidence. Look at history. Look at the women in your own life. Your mother, your sister, your daughter, your colleague, your friend. Are they wastes, or are they some of the most valuable people you know? Fifth, and this is crucial, we need to stop putting the burden of proof on girls. We need to stop demanding that they justify their existence with achievements and returns on investment. We need to start with the assumption that they deserve investment because they're human beings, and then we let them prove us right, which they will. Finally, we need to change the conversation. When someone says girls are a waste of money, don't just disagree. Dismantle the argument. Show them the economics. Show them the history. Show them that their attitude isn't just cruel, it's catastrophically expensive for everyone. Because here's the truth that we need to make undeniable. The single best investment a family, a community, a nation can make is in the education, health, and empowerment of girls and women. Not because they're saints. Not because they're perfect. But because they're half of humanity, and you can't build a prosperous civilization while suppressing half your population. It's not complicated. It's not controversial. It's not even debatable anymore. The evidence is in. The data is clear. The historical record is unambiguous. Societies that empower women flourish. Societies that don't fail. Let me end with this. That relative who told my father I was a waste of money. He has children of his own. His son, the one he invested everything in, the one he believed would carry on the family name and take care of him in old age, moved abroad years ago and rarely visits. He sends money occasionally, but there's no relationship, no connection. His daughter, the one he invested minimally in, the one he married off young, she's the one who checks on him. She's the one who ensures he has what he needs. She's the one who calls, who visits, who cares. And my father tells me that this man once said to him, with no sense of irony, "You're lucky your daughter turned out so well. It's rare. It's not rare. It's inevitable." When you invest in girls, when you give them opportunities, when you treat them as valuable, they prove their value over and over again. The tragedy is not that girls don't deliver returns. The tragedy is how many girls never get the chance to show what they can do. So I'm standing here today telling you those 5 words. Girls are a waste of money, have cost us centuries of progress. They've cost millions of lives. They've cost trillions of dollars. They've cost us scientific discoveries that could have cured diseases, technological innovations that could have solved problems, artistic achievements that could have enriched our culture, leadership that could have prevented conflicts. Every girl who was starved, married off young, kept her out of school, denied opportunities, told she was worthless, that's not just her loss, that's our loss. We will never know what those girls could have become. We will never know what they could have contributed. We will never know how much brighter our world would be if we had just given them a chance. But we can change the future. We can decide, right now, that no more girls will hear those words and believe them. We can decide that every girl born from this moment forward will know that she has infinite value, not because of what she can produce or earn, but because she exists. And then we can watch as she proves, yet again, that investing in her was the smartest thing we ever did. That's not idealism. That's not wishful thinking. That's just reality backed by every piece of evidence we have. Girls are not a waste of money. They never were. They never will be. And the sooner we all understand that, the sooner we all stop wasting the incredible potential that's been right in front of us all along.